It's chapter 5, Reaching Out, Staying Engaged with the World of On the Brink of Everything by Parker Palmer. So I'm going to say before I get into the two passages of scripture I've chosen for today, what I want to say is that that this, I think it's not surprising that we don't have everyone here today. I think this is probably challenging for some more than others. We live in a divided spectrum that really got even more intensified in its division in 2016 when Trump won the election. I think that we have to keep in mind that this was written in the height of what was going on. This was written in 17. This was written when and not that I agree with a lot of what he says, and there are things that I don't agree with, and I'll point and talk about some of those when they come into them. But what I do want to say is I appreciated, as I read through it, the fact that he kept calling him our 45th president. And not in the sense that I just think that it is so easy to step into a place where we can stigmatize someone and use their name. And I don't know, there was just an appreciation for me that his critique of him, I think for a lot of reasons was fair, but I also think a lot of the reasons had a lot of heartache and emotion that was tied up to that time and place. Now, I recognize that some in this Bible study may have been supportive of Trump and may still be supportive of Trump. And I'm not here to critique anyone's view or to lead in a conversation of a critique of Trump, because I don't think that's helpful for our body. What I do think is helpful is to, beneath what Parker Palmer is writing in his critique of the 45th president at the time that he was writing, are principles that we can dig into, because there's a lot of meat there. Principles of nonviolence, principles of righteous anger, principles of just war, principles of diversity versus homogeneity. Those are all things that are biblical concepts that we can be formed by. And so I just want to preface this whole conversation by saying he was at an emotional time. It was an emotional time in our culture. Whether or not you agree with his statements or not, it really doesn't make a difference. But what I want to do is get below the layer of that, rather than get caught up in that surface layer that I think would bog down. And anyone who's listening to this in the same regard, if for some reason you're not listening to this because you didn't want to engage in that conversation, that we take that higher road and say this isn't about slamming a president. We could slam every president who's ever been the president, all the way back to Georgie. But so yeah, with that in mind, the first passage I want to read you is from Matthew 5, in terms of orienting what he's talking about, and just by staying engaged with the world. Parker Palmer is an amazing activist, and there's parts of me that say that I regret the monolithic focus, but I understand why it was written and why they assemble those things. But I've read other things to him that he writes about engaging the world that I think would have been more beautiful here. But it is what it is. And I do think he points to some good aspects, and I want to bring some scriptures to that kind of highlight some of those. And the first one comes from Matthew 5, 38 through 46. And it says this: you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn also the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you, take your coat and if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. For if you heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemies, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? And do not even tax collectors do the same? And I'll carry on to the end of the section. And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect or holy or set apart, therefore, as your heavenly Father is set apart. challenging passage
Yeah.
for the Bible that most of us would, quite frankly, rather turn a blind eye to. And it draws into questions. It draws into questions, quite frankly, except for that Jews aren't held by the teachings of Jesus because they rejected him. But it draws into question what's happening now with retaliation. Although I think that that's a complicated issue. It draws very much so, and in any war, in any retaliation, and it's a really hard pill to swallow because it means, to the extent what would happen if someone were attacking my family. Would I retaliate? Would I shoot a gun? Would I kill someone? Would I take someone's life? And that's a complicated issue, but that ultimately, if someone does something against you and is violent against you, or even emotionally or verbally, how do you move about that? How do you take the abuse? And it seems so, I don't know, demoralizing, dismiss. I mean, it's such a hard passage to take in a literal way. So before we go further, I just want to, in order for us to embrace some of the stuff Parker Palmer's talking about, I think we need this to sort of be in the context of our minds as we look at those readings. So how does that passage make you feel, make you think, make you?
Well, I think when you're really angry, and he definitely really, really, really was angry with Trump. He really was. And we've all been there. You've all been angry with someone. And at the moment, you're not forgiving them. It takes a while.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while, you soften up and you you do forgive them in time, I feel.
Yeah.
But I think when you're really right there and angry, you're kind of blinded. You just.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that obviously, 3 years later, after his administration is done, I think that there are people who, it's not in your face anymore, so people can be reflective on it in a different way than when you're feeling that tension in the midst of where you're at. And I think the tension, regardless of whether you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump, I think that there's tension there, or ambivalent. I think many of us are moderates.
A lot of people have the same feelings for Biden today.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Especially,
Goes both ways.
Yeah, So those presidents, but like they said, the presidents should age. They shouldn't age us. Did he say that?
Yeah, that's someone else. But and there is, and that's the challenge. When you look at someone and the people had such loathing for Trump, how do we, as a church, for those who had loathing for him, come to a place where we're at peace? And it doesn't mean we have to agree with him. Doesn't mean we have to like him. But that means we should also still pray for him.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
That means that we should, that there is some level of respecting the government, even when we don't respect the government, because it's the system that we're in, and the Bible points to that on many occasions. But I think that our 45th president, there are many things that I had a lot of problems with, of what happened during his presidency. But what I will say is, I think that in a very acute way, he pulled back the facade of political correctness that had been cast across our country, and that people were acting in a politically, or projecting a politically correct way, that almost it kind of took that layer off. And it allowed people, in other words, it took the facade that we're a politically correct nation off. We're not. There were convictions, there were prejudice, there were opinions, there were lots of things. And I think his presidency brought all of that out in a way that is challenging and hard, but in a way that, as someone who would rather see the truth than a facade, I found okay, well, now we know where we're actually at in our culture. That racism is actually still something that's out there, and we're witnessing it in firsthand. So, what else from this "Turn Your Other Cheek" passage? No, everyone.
Well, it's not my first response.
What is it?
Turning the other cheek.
No, it's not.
I
No,
mean, my
I mean,
first
I've,
response is I want to retaliate. So that's why it's challenging for me.
You're
yeah.
human. You're human.
Yes,
you
I
know?
am.
Well, and we give ourselves conventions in that way. We're human. It's okay because we don't want anyone judging us. What we've
No, but we all have been there.
Yeah.
You know, I don't, you know.
I mean, it was honestly in my after being fired from that job, and it was an existential sort of just, yeah, just it was one of the worst things I've ever gone through in my life in terms of just feeling like my calling was sort of into question. And I reached a very dark place, and it was reaching the dark place where I was like, hey man, I remember thinking I wished that his daughter would had some harm. I wanted his daughter to be hurt so that
So it would hurt him.
he would be hurt by it.
Right.
And then when I had this realization of that's the way I felt, it was like, that's horrible. Like, that's malice. That's like, there's something purely wicked that I would not just wish harm on him, not like he would get beat up in an alley.
Right.
And then I would come in at the last second and give him a punch. Just kidding. but that someone he loved, like it was a layer deep, and it really, but that is everything about us that is human, and nothing about us that is divine.
True.
Yeah.
What are you all thinking out there? Denny, Pat, Glenda?
They're all quiet.
There's
They're
do you see that square?
Oh, that's just that.
Okay.
Yes. What you said about taking off some kind of facade of political correctness or politeness, I'm not sure about that, because I think it became a period of time in which hate speech erupted. It increased tremendously in our society. I mean, the Southern Poverty Law Center has documented that, how hate speech towards minorities or LGBTQ or Jews or Muslims or whatever all increased. I don't think that's progress. I don't think just taking away politeness is a good thing in that case.
No, and I agree, but I think what I'm saying is not that I think that the rise of those things were good, but the presence of those things were hidden. And I guess what I see from a that God often reveals the true nature of things, and then sometimes division happens in that, and that puts us in a place where we have to make decisions about what we believe. So I'm not saying I'm not naming the veneer of political correctness or the facade of political correctness and the removal of that as a virtue, as much as it was a leveler to say that we are not in a healthy place. It's kind of like the church too. We can pretend that we all, get along, but I would rather actually reveal the facade that we're getting along and actually get along and move towards that. And so I just meant it more of at the time I never would have seen, I think that the knowledge and presence that there are people that are, white supremacists or that are patriotic nationalists that are so extreme that they are racist, and they are, those things are important to know that they're there.
Yeah.
And to not know that they're there and to pretend that they're not is not a state that I want to live in. I mean, not a state of being that I want to live in. And I think for me, it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize these views were as extreme as they were.
I didn't either.
So, I don't know. Just my thought. That's not from God. That's from Jason. But push back. Don't just let me. If you have something you want to push against, please do. Because I'm only 90% sure about anything I say. The next passage is Romans 12:17 through 21. Romans 12:17 through 21. And it's similar sort of spirit of Paul probably reflecting on the Matthew passage to some extent. Do not repay any evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is all possible, so far as depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourself, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. Add the first clause for each of these. If your enemy is thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their head, which is kind of funny because it makes you feel like you're getting them a little bit. Like, how you like those coals, buddy? But do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I think that's the challenge that we face. I mean, like, as much as I think it's a complicated issue, that tit for tat war mentality, if you do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, you're going to do this, and it keeps going back and forth. And game theory will say that tit for tat combativeness in board games are impossible. Like it's a frame of mind that once you get in, it is always, I'm going to one up, push it farther, and it leads farther down this path. The only way to get out of a tit for tat mentality that often define relationships and wars and battles and conflicts is for one side to take the higher ground and to compromise. And it creates space and room for trust to be understood after you get over the suspicion that someone's trying to dupe you. And then it allows the other side to say, I'll give a little. And that way back is possible, but it requires then the reversing of that ordering of backing a little bit, a little here. Everyone gives a little, but you get a little until you come to a place of trust. It is possible. Reconciliation, it is, and sometimes I think we sell that idea short. But what is your vengeance is mine, and I will repay. Anyone? No? No one online? You're all thinking of someone you want to get back at right now.
No.
You're feeling guilty about it, I can tell. Well,
Yeah,
confession sounded from
sometimes
a Catholic.
we're against all of you. No, I'm kidding.
It's got what he said. It's funny.
I just feel that, we're so focused on this time now and the problems that we have and the division. Our country has been that way from day one. Yeah. Even from the beginning, everybody thought the revolution, everybody participated. Only a third of the people did. And our government was formed. Only a third of the people take a part of it. And all this hate that we've seen throughout, this is nothing compared to what the 30s and 40s were prior to World War II. Some of the hate against Jews and other people was unbelievable. We had Nazi parties in America, senators and congressmen going along with the German Nazis. So it's not new. It's something that's been going on.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Why do they hate the Jews so much? Why? Why?
Well, you get into the whole argument of you have to find somebody to blame. And because of, I think part of it, my church blamed the Jews for killing Christ. And then that became the reason why. The Jewish people became, quote, quote, because of Shakespeare and all these stories, the moneylenders. And they didn't like moneylenders. And so it all goes back throughout history that, so yeah, it's part of that. But it's, again, people who are authoritarian always try and find somebody to blame.
A scapegoat.
And blame our problems on somebody else. So that's part of it.
And I would add to your question, why do people hate the Jews? I mean, one, there's got to be the question of at what part of the turmoil that comes upon Jews throughout the history of the scripture has to do with their obedience and disobedience, living out their calling as God's chosen people. And I'm not saying that what's currently happening is a part of that, but I'm also not saying it's not. What we have is a book of all of the stories of their disobedience and how God punishes them and brings them to repentance and brings them back. And you have nations attacking them. Why? Well, perhaps because we buy into the narrative that Moses fled. This is a part of this isn't folklore. This is things that we actually believe. There was a man named Moses. He led them out. God, in other words, the divine came out and rescued people, and they see themselves as the one true God's chosen people. Well, no one likes the entitled snotty kid on the block who thinks they're better than everyone else. So, I mean, there could have been, in other words, nation envy, God envy. I mean, the sense of, how do you think, there's that sense of they are the chosen people. And so in some sense, sociologically or anthropologically, when you think someone is better than you or someone you do perceive them as better than you, then they become the hated one.
That's so silly.
I mean, I'm just saying, think back to
I just think they've been picked on. Yeah.
who did you hate the most in high school? Why?
Oh, and I went up here in Lake City, there was only 5 kids, so we
Oh
got
yeah, I guess
along.
it's about no, but yeah. I mean,
Well, they've had a
Jews
rough
have a
time.
rough go. Yes,
Yeah, they
there's no
do.
doubt about that. And whether God's involved in that or
Yeah,
rescues them from that,
Yeah,
I'm not
it's
sure.
kind of sad.
Well, let's dive into this before we get into the actual what's an angry Quaker do. And I would say that among the nonviolent Quakers, Mennonites, those who come from this tradition over the last few decades, Parker Palmer has definitely been one of those voices in a number of different settings. Is there anything that stands out that you saw before the introduction leading up to 1:15, 16, 17, 18 before the beginning of the break that you wanted to point out?
No, I didn't have anything.
No?
Jason,
Yeah.
on page 117,
Yeah.
where he writes, "This essay and others in this chapter are laced with my political convictions.
Yeah.
Please understand that I write not to change yours, but to encourage you to express them.
Yeah.
And citizens of democracy have the right and responsibility to do."
Absolutely.
And I think that's,
Freedom of
I
speech.
think freedom of speech, yes. Yeah. Without people getting angry that you have a different conviction that they have. And I think we've lost that ability to be civil when we discuss politics, and
John, what you had said earlier about people say you can't be a Christian.
oh yeah, we were watching PBS one night and they interviewed all the Republicans
In Iowa.
in
It
Iowa.
was a round table.
And then they did the same thing with all the Democrats. And on both sides, they asked them this question: can you be a Christian and be a Republican? Or can you be a Christian and a Democrat? Both sides said you can't, which is so ironic and extreme, but it's the state that we're in right now, I think. So
No, that's why I don't go to the men's prayer breakfast on Thursday, because that statement was uttered. So they said you couldn't be a Democrat and be a Christian, and I was like, okay, Silas, we're leaving. And I think that sense of judgment is where we're at in our culture. But I am very careful never to judge what it means, by Christian, meaning that you believe in Christ. Like that's you can interpret Christ's teachings in a variety of different ways, but to suggest the salvific nature of someone is dependent upon their political party is offensive and theologically irresponsible.
I don't get that.
So, well, it's just tribal hate talk. So, it's division. It's wanting to other the other, and I think that some of the issues that Parker Palmer talks about, embracing that sense of diversity, again, is I think is a part of God's plan. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Don't come around the Tower of Babel. Get out. There's that, the Pentecost, it's always a diversification, because God doesn't want us to be united for our earthly qualities, but for our spiritual connection to him in Christ. And when we start that as the basis, this is why I don't think anyone should have a political affiliation personally. I don't think you all should be Democrats or Republicans or independents. I think you can vote that way, vote however you want to vote. But I think that when we give our spirituality to a political party, we become a pawn in the whole scheme. And Christ, they're not using my faith in Christ for their political power gain, because neither of them, the whole thing is screwed up. We all know that.
Yeah.
Neither of us, no party on any side really likes, other than the zealots, like any, we're always at the same boat. We don't like either of these candidates. They are horrible. We're choosing between the worst possible, but we don't have a choice. That's the unfortunate system we live in.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we need to give them our political allegiances, and you allow them to use those political allegiances to promote things for their own political power. That's my soapbox speech for the day. All right. Anything else in the?
Well, I missed that. Thank you for pointing that out. 'Cause
Yeah, I did
evidently
too.
I missed that
I
one.
did too.
That does help you, and that should help everybody a little bit realize that he's just saying what he feels.
Right.
Yeah, he doesn't want you. Stanley Hauerwas is a little outspoken Mike Tyson sounding professor at Duke University in divinity school, and he likes to start his classes by telling them, I'm not here to teach you how to think. I'm here to teach you how to think like me. And
There you go.
and I think that Parker Palmer is not saying that.
Yeah,
He's saying,
exactly.
this is my views, this is my journey. And I think that's why it's important also to seat these essays in the context of what was happening in our culture right now at that time, which was pretty volatile.
Right.
On all over the place.
Yep.
Now, if Parker Palmer sat down to reflect on some of these things, I think he would still come out on the same end of it, but he might communicate that a little differently. One of the things, not that I think he's anything really offensive, but I think he just, he might approach it with a longer view of history. I would point out on the bottom of page 117, in the praise of diversity, he makes the case that homogeneity is as dangerous to a society as it is to an ecosystem when it comes to productivity, creativity, sustainability, and resilience. And I wrote in my margin, is that the same for the church? Because the interesting thing about it is the church has actually, although would advocate for diversity within the church, I think the church for centuries has thrived on, I'm having trouble talking tonight, homogeneity. And maybe that's why maybe there's a lack of productivity and a lack of creativity that we've seen over centuries. But we have sustained ourselves for 2,000 years in a largely homogeneic system. So, any thoughts about that?
That's true.
No. All right. Okay. What's an angry Quaker to do? What raised your hackles, or made you think, or where did you underline with a pen really hard so that the lines went through the next page?
I just read it. I didn't underline nothing. I was scared to.
I like on page 120
Mm-hmm.
in the third bullet point, kind of at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Repressed anger is dangerous, a weapon we aim at ourselves that sooner or later injures others. But anger harassed as an energy.
Harnessed.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Thank you, Jason.
Just changes the meaning of the statement.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Wow. Anger harnessed as an energy that animates social action on behalf of new life, for all is redemptive. I like the harnessing the anger for a greater cause.
Yeah.
For good.
Yeah, for good.
Yeah.
I think
in the right way.
righteous anger.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you need that.
Absolutely.
And I think the repressed anger is just asking to get cancer or get sick.
Oh, I totally agree.
Oh yeah, I'm with you on that. I'll go down that. I'll go down that.
That rabbit hole.
I'll go down that rabbit hole that everything is connected.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true. I mean, and for me, when I, again, I'm going back to the one thing that I've experienced that was pretty horrendous. I was so angry. I could feel it. I don't want to live my life every day hating somebody.
No.
And I didn't want it to be just time's going to pass and eventually I'll forget. Or I didn't want it to be, I guess life turned out so God had the best, and maybe God did have a plan for that. But I wanted it to be an intentional call to how do we reconcile. And
That's a good
and as I've said before, and other times when I've used this example is, for me, I don't hold that anger anymore. Shannon still has resentment and hurt because she's never had really the opportunity to sit with them, nor I don't know if she would want to, but that sense that's
Yeah,
and
but you're her husband, and that's just,
I know it's different anger.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
and I absolutely get that
Yeah.
it's different.
It's
It's different. It's protective
Yeah. Oh,
anger.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you just hug her for that.
It
because she just loves
But
you.
what I mourn for her is that in the freedom that I feel,
Oh,
I
you'd like
can't
her to
give to
have
her.
that.
Right.
Yeah, right.
I would like her to be freed from that, but she
Yeah.
can't be.
She maybe someday will.
Maybe
be.
someday when I hypnotize her. Just kidding. Just joking, everyone. Joking, not joking. What else?
Jason,
Yeah.
when he says on that third point there, to follow up on what you were saying, repressed anger is dangerous, a weapon we aim at ourselves. And then he goes on, that sooner or later injures others. How does that happen? I mean, a lot of people, they turn it inward and it becomes depression. But how
Yeah.
does it sooner or later injures others?
Well, I think, I mean, in my own life, if I had repressed my anger and it was hurting me and I was unavailable as a father and
Yes.
a husband, as a minister, and everyone I'm encountering, I'm a disaster and I can't put my life back together. I mean, in an extreme example, but I even think on what he's maybe talking about in a political sense is the sense of, the anger that we have, if it's not dealt with, if it's not managed, if it's not understood in a healthy way, can lead to violent acts.
And resentment,
and resentment,
which poisons relationships.
and all sorts of isms and things. Yeah, Pat. Oh, I saw your hand go up. Sorry.
She's yawning.
No, she did this. She was hypnotizing.
I say about how we participated in marches.
We can hear you when you whispered it. Just so you know, we can hear you when you whisper to Jim.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was muted.
You are not. We heard every word.
Yeah.
Okay.
She loves all of you.
Yeah, I do. I do.
Oh, we
No,
love
I
you.
would. I thought he had muted us again. But anyway,
No, I never
Following-
mute you unless you have backup.
okay. Well, we had muted ourselves, but then we weren't anymore. So following the election of Trump, I will admit, were very depressed and discouraged because we had no admiration for him as a leader. And we didn't know how to express that. And he's saying here, what's an angry Quaker to do? Well, we're not Quakers. But one of the things that we did do, and I will admit this, and you'll probably ridicule us for it, but we participated in some marches here in Chicago.
I got a pink hat.
expressed-
I got
What's
a pink,
that?
Glenda.
I'm sorry.
I got a pink pussycat hat that Shannon made for me. We went to
Oh,
too.
well, good for you. I never got one of those, but we
You
saw
can
a
have
lot
it.
of them.
I don't wear it now, so next time you come to Lake City, I'll let you have it.
We never got those, but we did participate in those marches, which was
Cathartic.
it was cathartic and encouraging because there were all kinds of talk about diversity. There were all kinds of people involved.
Yeah.
And religious groups were involved too, which was encouraging to us. There were groups of nuns. There were,
Yeah.
people carrying signs that they represented certain religious groups, which was encouraging because it wasn't only white evangelicals who had a say as Christians. There were other people as Christians speaking. And we felt like we had a place there.
Yeah.
And we did a number of those marches that first year, and I don't know if it, probably didn't affect anyone, but it encouraged us to know there were other people who cared and were expressing their concerns in that way. And it was
Absolutely.
all completely peaceful and respectful and actually quite cheerful and joyful.
Yeah. No, and I think that they give us places of solidarity, and it was a major shift in a time of our culture, and it was the first time we had a president saying some things that challenged a lot of and I would say just expectations of what a president might say. But I think it did. I think it brought solidarity, and I think that there's a place for expressing one's voice on all issues. And this is one of the issues that Parker Palmer does, and that freedom of speech is an important part of our culture. It's probably foundational more than almost any other. Freedom of religion and freedom of speech are two of the bedrocks of what we are as a nation. So I'm glad that you feel comfortable sharing that, and I applaud you for your activism. Anything else in that first section? If not, we'll move to. Is that the whole thing?
The soul of the patriot.
Soul of the Patriot.
Soul of the Patriot. I liked at the bottom of 21, 22, it says, only by discussing our differences openly, honestly, and with civility can we honor the intentions of the framers of the Constitution, whose many were Presbyterian. I like to always add, who gave us the first system of government that regarded conflict not as the enemy of good social order, but as the engine of a better social order. If we hold our conflicts creatively, and I think perhaps sometimes at the root of all of this probably is some sense of pride, that we've chosen the right ideology, that we're on the right side of history, that we have the right tribe. And the truth is, none of us do. And when we start to hold these things as a part of our sense of pride and self, when someone attacks that very symbol of that allegiance, then we become personally offended. I mean, and we are an emotional culture. I mean, look at the zeal that surrounds football in our culture, and how angry you get and how much you hate someone you've never met because they're wearing a jersey of another team.
Well, that's crazy.
I mean, how asinine is that? But that's the level of emotional maturity we have in our culture. So it's not surprising when you put that on a political realm and you actually put meaningful ideologies behind those political views, and then people as symbols of those, that we end up in a place where we're a bifurcated culture.
I just wish we could have just an ordinary working man run for president, not millionaires. I would love just an ordinary man that knows how to work.
Yeah.
But that'll never happen again.
I'm voting for Cornel West. Just kidding.
Jason?
Yeah.
Wait.
No, we're
Oh, okay.
That section you just read kind of reminded me of the community aspect that I think we used to have in our government, where government was okay, government was good, government was something you should be happy to serve. And we've lost that over the years. And, a lot of people are saying government is the problem, government causes the pain. And the government is there to serve us and do the things we can't do. We can't form an army. We can't have a fire department. It's a combination of the community coming together to serve everyone. And I think that's what we need more, and I think that's maybe what he's trying to confer here. So,
Well, I think that's one of the
we got to be a community.
Yeah, well, that paragraph that I read goes on, the work that does not have to be done in a large scale public forum, and we try to do that in these large scale. But it can and should be done in smaller venues: the family, friendship, a neighborhood, and a congregation. And I wrote in my margin, that's faith formation. That's the formation of an individual. And I think that's one of the challenges that I have here in Lake City. We're 400 people and we're divided over stuff and we're not willing to listen to one another and put in one another's needs or concerns or the community as our, caring for the community ethos as a value rather than how does this reflect me or how does it affect me? So,
But you know what? I don't think most people know how to have a civil discourse.
not anymore.
I mean, I don't think they have the skill.
Yeah. Well, do they have the skill to have rational discourse?
Not anymore.
No.
Critical thinking.
That's
We
sad.
don't teach critical thinking. We don't teach logic. We don't teach rationality in school. We don't teach. We don't form our young people in college to be thinkers and to be participants in conversation. We form them as specialized technical type workers that go into certain industries.
Right.
It's been one of the critiques over the last 50 years of the education in the United States. Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind is the book that came out in the 80s and pointed to that as we become a technological nation, higher education becomes white collar trade school, not humanitarian liberal arts education where you teach the person to be a part of a democracy as a thinker. And so we now live in a day and age where social dialogue is permeated and guided and shaped by emotional convictions, not a baseline of rationality or logic, which is what has governed much of the most productive levels of history in terms of anytime you appeal to, because that's what gives government its function. And when we see, and you can look back and you can, don't get me started on the whole banking industry and the relationship between the politics over the last 50 to 80 years. But what we've seen since the baby boom is a massive, we've seen a massive increase in population. And we've also seen corruption that has drawn money and resources and inflated and housing markets and interest rates in order so we're all essentially moving to a feudal system where we have, without the authority, but we have two classes. We have the middle class and below, and we have this extreme wealthy class. So I'm off target, so I won't talk anymore about that. Ask me on another day. I have a few opinions on that. Danny, I feel like you're about to say something. I can see you lean forward. You're like, come on, bring it, Danny.
What? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. One of the things that, and I agree with you guys, that, like you said, we don't do. I don't know how many of you were on debate teams and such, but the neat thing about it was you would take one side and debate against another person on another side. But in some of the debates, then halfway through, they would stop you and say, now take the other side.
Yeah.
So you could understand both sides of a question. And I don't think we do that anymore. Now we just take a side and we go against everyone else.
Yeah. No, you're spot on.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
But
And also-
Denny,
Yeah.
at that time, people considered facts to be true.
And we should.
We don't get that a lot nowadays. So,
Yeah.
you can tell somebody the truth and they refuse to believe it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and this is where from 1750, you have the beginning of the Enlightenment, and it was theoretically the beginning of the modern period, sort of started 1600s and sort of came into full play in the 1700s. We believe they kind of ended in the 1950s, around the time where we begin the marking post-modernity. It's kind of the baby boom that came out, and this is where a lot of psychological stuff came about. And so we went from a place where truth was black and white. And this is why you see apologetics. This is why you see a proof for, a case for Christ, Lee Strobel type stuff. We were making proofs even from science, even from, we were saying you can prove God exists this way because the church bought into the idea that we had to prove in some sort of empirical way that God existed, that the church was a valid entity. But in the 1950s, as we began to focus on the psychology of the individual, what we realized is that the culture created in a closed context of like a little German village creates one version of reality. There's one way to parent And if you're outside of that, then you need to get in line again. There's one way to find a spouse. There's one way to be in a relationship. And when we begin to see the intermixing of cultures and the intermixing and the globalization and the shrinking of the world, what we get is a place where all of a sudden we're recognizing that everyone's reality is 100% different. The way you look at the life, what you're going through, the way you look at life, me, everyone that we encounter, everyone is experiencing life in their own circumstances in a different way. That's not a bad thing. It's a recognition of diversity. And again, this goes back to the scripture or theological side. This is where we find our unity. We find our unity in Christ and recognizing that everything that we're experiencing in this world, from a physical, from an emotional, from a material aspect, is all temporal. And we're meant as spiritual beings to overcome those. This is why any ism, feminism, racism, anti-Semitism, any of these things that others, anyone else, is always, quite frankly, demonic. Because we are called to recognize ourselves as spiritual beings, and if we place ourselves in a position of priority or privilege or power over anyone else in the whole world, then we are betraying the very thing that Christ called us to do, and the very thing that those passages pointed us to, putting someone else before us, because this life doesn't matter. As if it was a game, it doesn't matter in the end. And the only thing that matters is our obedience to Christ and our love for others, because that is what is ultimately spreading that gospel to the world. But that's a hard thing to deal with. I mean, we're all in our cushy little mountain town. Me too. I took a job here, so I can't believe.
Jason.
Yeah, Kenny.
I think we're in a sad state where we have to question or doubt truth. Like several have said, in the old days, if someone said something, it was the truth. You took a handshake. Now you don't know who to believe.
Yeah.
In the news.
When you can't even believe photographs. I mean, like,
No.
there's just nothing that there's nothing that is believable anymore.
Isn't that sad?
They have the power to manipulate everything in our culture, and
Then there's that artificial intelligence.
Oh my
coming.
gosh, don't even get me started. We're gonna do
That's
a
scary.
whole segment this summer. I have a friend.
Well, how do we stop all this? I mean, this is the thing. There's no stopping it.
Yeah.
If you haven't all watched The Matrix, you need to watch The Matrix, because that's what that movie's about. What happens when the world is taken over by computers because they become more intelligent than us?
That is just so frightening.
It's also the dumbing down of America, because I am so thankful at where Judah is at St. John's. They do not allow them to have computers in the classroom.
Wow.
That's a good thing. Too much computers.
Yeah.
And I told Judah, if he ever uses any of those technologies to write papers, it will be the end of his college career. All right,
Jason,
yeah.
when AI watches The Matrix, we are in trouble.
Yes, they'll be like, look what we can do.
They probably already know.
Let's go to one. I'm going to skip ahead over the Soul of the Patriot, the first, unless there's something on that first 2 pages that you want to point out.
Well, I like that last paragraph on 125, because what would it mean to have a lover's quarrel with my country right now? Because I think we're all ready. We're ready.
Well,
we just don't know how to make a change. We don't know how to change it.
And it goes back up to the line just in the quote. There are 3 kinds of patriots: 2 good, 2 bad, 1 good. The bad ones are the uncritical lovers. That means those who are just jumping on the bandwagon of any emotional sort of agenda they want, and the loveless critics, those who are just critiquing everything with no sense of passion for life. Good patriots carry on the lovers' quarrel with their country, a reflection of God's lovers' quarrel with the world. And I think that's the tension that we do as Christians live in. How do we be in this world and love the world and hate the world, perhaps, in the same time? That is not our home. And I think that goes back even on page 126 at the bold at the top. First, it must be a quarrel about what is and what is not true. And I think for us, we have to define truth by the scriptures, by the revelation to the community of faiths that we are a part of, by the way God has convicted us and the Spirit has convicted us personally. What is true for us is not going to be true for everyone, and the recognition of that and understanding of that is the beginning of a conversation. If we come in with lies or falsehoods or different realities or looking at something totally different perspective, and the unwillingness to consider where that plausibility structure exists. There's nothing true about the statement 2 + 2 = 4. Nothing true about that. Because the words 2 and plus and equals and 4 are symbols of concepts that we as a human culture have agreed to create a plausibility structure with which we can operate.
You're getting over my head.
I'm just saying that the only reason that exists
about
as being
that.
a truth to say 2 + 2 = 4 is because we agree.
So
we
that
set
makes it
up
the
that
truth.
way.
Because what's that?
So that makes it the truth.
But
because we
it doesn't take away from the fact that there's something that lies underneath that.
Okay.
And that it points to. But the language that we use is often where we get tripped up on, because we look at things from a different perspective, which is why mathematics is boiling down to 1 and zeros, and computer technology boils down to 1 and zeros, because it is devoid of cultural influence. Which is why the robots are going to take over everything.
Jason, I like on 127.
Yep.
At the bottom of the bolded paragraph, where it says, for dialogue to succeed, participants must have something in common.
Yeah, see, I underlined that right there. Good job. Good job, Kate.
I think that's just basic.
And what do you think that is? What is our thing in common? This is your test.
Well, as
Every
Christians,
Jesus.
we all have that in common.
Jesus is the answer.
Right.
That's just the
Jesus.
Every Sunday school question,
Jesus.
the answer is Jesus. I thought she was going to say something else for a second. I was trying to help her out. No, you're right, though, and I think that's something in common. It is, but even that has diversity in it, and how we interpret the scriptures and how we view the scriptures as an errant
Right.
or inerrant, or
Because they're different religions.
because they're different. Yeah, they're different, and they're different experiences. You know what? You go into the southern hemisphere and the spirit world, where it's far more robust. You're going to face a context that is their worldview, their cosmology, their understanding of the way the world functions and works, and their participation is entirely different from ours.
Well, like Yoli coming back from India, and we all got together and we were talking about it. And I think what I loved about it is how she said, everything is sacred. Just everything is sacred.
Wow.
You know, and I've heard, I mean, as a kid, or I don't know where I heard it, but like even the worms, you put them back in the ground because they're sacred.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm trying more and more to see everything sacred. Just real loving sacred, because I like that.
Yeah, I do too.
I got a book for you.
Oh, I love it. I love books.
What is it?
Practicing the Presence of God
Oh,
by
I read that book.
Brother Lawrence.
Oh, I love Brother Lawrence.
Have you read
Yes,
Practicing the
I
Presence
love
of
him.
God?
If you
Washing
stick out a
dishes,
piece of
every moment
straw.
is sacred.
Yeah,
Yeah.
anything he
I
does,
need
he
to
does for
reread that.
We should.
I
that
love
should be.
it.
We should read that book.
Oh,
Yes,
it is. Yeah, it's
let's
awesome.
do.
That little Brother Lawrence.
I
He's
know.
so awesome.
In the kitchen.
In the kitchen, washing his dishes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he said when he went to get his wine, was he crippled bad because he'd said he'd roll over them because he couldn't. He'd roll over the wine.
Oh.
Yeah, because he couldn't walk
I
right.
don't remember that.
I don't remember that either, but I'm sure that's in there if you remember it.
Well, I'm sure it's in there because that's something I've read
We'll
two or
pull
three
it out
times
and
too.
look.
Okay.
Wine reference and Brother Lawrence. He's wrote other things too, so perhaps. Okay, what else? Anything?
Well, he talks about in these on 128, 129, he talks about telling the truth in love.
See right
That's
there?
what we're supposed to do. Mhm.
And I think that has like you can tell somebody something like a hard truth.
Yeah.
But if you are coming in your heart from a place of love and care,
Yeah.
it is going to be received differently.
If it genuinely is in love and
Right.
care. Because sometimes we mask our you know,
Right.
our judgment
True.
as care.
Yeah.
You know, Jason, I sometimes think we just want our truth so we can prove the other wrong,
Oh,
Yeah.
and prove that we are right.
Mhm.
And that's one of the hardest things, not to do,
I think that goes back to again, it's pride.
In the
Yeah.
one up
Yes,
position.
yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
That's why I always say that I'm 90% sure of things.
We need to talk about that, Jason.
That was it. How about praise of diversity? Is there anything else in that section anyone wants to lift up? I like what you said. This form of telling the truth in love. Telling the truth in love is that it's critical for the health of our civic relationship, as it is in our intimate relationships. And I think that there is in comparing the civic relationship to the intimate relationship is a opening oneself to the vulnerable nature of relationships, whatever level they're at.
Bless you.
Thanks. Yeah. At the bottom of 129, it says, "The country I love is inherently flawed, as are all human constructs and all human beings." That's a nice reformed nod of the hat towards our human depravity. Well, let's go on into 130, praise of diversity. Oh, excuse me. He sort of introduces some
Jason?
different stuff. Yeah.
I liked on 131 where he says biodiversity makes an ecosystem more creative, productive, adaptive to change, and resilient in the face of stress. And it was like, the comment was made about India. Linda was talking about India being, worshiping different things and, having different things as holy. If we can respect other people's views like that, I think it does, biodiversity really does make us, a better society.
Yeah.
Understanding each other. And back on a section that we went over, and I was just looking at something, Anne Lamont's line that not forgive is like drinking rat poison.
Oh, yes.
And waiting for the rat. And, we've all got to the point where we don't forgive the other party or the other race or the other culture. And, I don't know what the answer to that is, but, it hurts the person who hates more than the person that's being hated.
Right.
I like to think that the class we did this summer with the different, looking at different world religions opened the doors to that, breaking down those barriers in that regard. But I think you're right, that biodiversity is what makes the world work. So by that, Ken, I assume you're in favor of the wolves being? I'm just kidding. Just joking. Well, it's funny.
Jason,
Yeah.
how do we go about that in a community where we make biodiversity and accept everyone? How do we do that? How do we get people who are not believing in that to accept others? Take your time.
My off the cuff answer is by becoming a biracial culture.
Yeah.
Honestly, and I say that both half jokingly, but as a half Filipino, half German European descent American, biraciality puts you in a weird place where you're neither nor, and you're both and.
Mhm.
And so that combining of cultures, it makes people, they don't know where to place me my whole life. They never, it kind of throws people, I'm racially ambiguous. But it's also, I'm not fully Filipino, and Filipinos don't accept me as fully Filipino. Oh, he's half. But most of my life growing up, they're like, oh, well, you're not full white. There's something going on there. And so, but that sense of not belonging to either side has left me in the middle. And if we are all in a place where we find ourselves in the middle,
we'd be better, huh?
then we're a little bit more tolerant
And understanding.
of
Yeah.
both sides. So,
Jason,
yeah.
I was filling out a form one day, and they had that Caucasian whatever, and they had other. I wrote mutt. So
Yes.
That's what we all are.
Is that what you really did?
no.
Oh, you don't believe it. Don't- That's truth.
Yeah, trying to twist the truth, Jim.
Can I say
Yeah.
something? Did any of you sing the song as children? Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world.
Yeah.
Red and
Yeah.
yellow, black and white. We sang that a lot. I don't think
Uh.
kids sing that today, but even though I grew up in a very white community as a child, it was kind of emphasized to us that we were all God's children. I don't know if we really lived it, but we sang it.
Yeah.
And I don't think kids are necessarily told that so much today, especially in the evangelical churches. There, it's all more, let's all just stay white.
Well, I don't want to go that far, Glenda. I'll push back on that.
Okay.
Growing up in the Assemblies of God, which I would put in the evangelical tradition, had more diversity than any Presbyterian church I've ever been in.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. And we were, even in the Pentecostal tradition in the Assemblies of God, they were ordaining women. You know, I grew up in the Assemblies of God seeing women ordained and having a multi-ethnic church for most of my life. So for
Are
me,
they still?
yeah.
Today, are they too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would say, the Assemblies of God Church, I mean, that just could be an isolated situation, but the Assemblies of God Church came out of the Black church. So as one of the few expressions that in modern ecclesiology that actually is the narrative is flipped. And so for me, I actually, when I felt called to go to the mainline church where I find myself now in the Presbyterian church, I felt like I was bringing diversity to a largely white mono, and it is. I mean, I think we have diverse churches, but 85, probably 90% of our churches are 85 to 90%, if not more, white.
Yeah.
We may have values for diversity.
Well, I'd love to go to a black one. It's hallelujah, and
I
they're
know,
just
they're
singing.
so expressive.
They're so happy.
You can do that when I preach. I got some Pentecostal in me. Throw out
Oh,
some amens and
I think the
hallelujahs.
black churches are more fun.
Oh, you get me going. If you start
They're
amen in
sold.
my preaching, you'll see what happens. The Pentecostal will
Well,
come
we
out.
might try that sometime.
You're going to be so sorry.
Hallelujah.
You might give me.
You are going to be so sorry, Jason.
Y'all
Amen.
help us out. Will y'all help us out?
So I will
Start a
say
movement.
that on my page 132, where it says diversity makes our lives more vital, I wrote the question: tourists.
Terrace.
The tourism in Lake City make us more vital? I mean,
Yes.
Well, we wouldn't be here without them.
Yes, I know.
Absolutely.
My critique of Palmer through all of his chapters, but in particular for this one, is I do feel like he lives in a privileged, diverse space.
Yeah.
And
He says
Well, he
that.
says that.
and he owns it, but even if you own it and then you have it revealed subtly in other ways, I think that and I would say that that to his diversity of dealing with highly educated, racially diverse, thoughtful, rational people who are all operating on the same strata of life is very different than social activism in the throes of everyday, urban environments or rural environments or, whatever environment you're in, you have a vast difference in how people interact and exchange. And, I've often thought for the little family in the middle of Iowa who really have never seen a Black person or a Mexican person come into their community, when that happens, they take social pressures and and social prejudice and social stigmas and social, stereotypes, and that's the only resource they have in order to interpret what's happening around them. And so in many ways, because we don't address this in a very rational way from a very national level or from a state level or from a societal level, it allows individuals to take stereotypes and propagate racism or sexism or whatever it might be, based on idiosyncratic views that come from a very small portion of our culture. I think most people are willing to stop, and if they're given the opportunity in a healthy way to consider diversity, but they're just never introduced to it in a way that actually is functional. So, all right, anything else?
No.
Good.
What's that?
Jason,
Still on.
it in our neighborhood, we live in a diverse neighborhood, and it wasn't something that I don't know, it just happened. We're suburban Chicago, and there are people from a number of nationalities. Filipino and Mexican American and in India, and some Black, some Middle Eastern. We all get along. I don't think we're close, but it's just as neighborhoods spread out, different people move in, and it just happens kind of automatically, and everybody has a stake in getting along together, so it can be done.
Danny's
And it's
I could tell. He says he gets real close to it. Then he's like, I gotta get close to the screen to say something.
okay.
Go ahead, Denny.
Well,
Leading,
I will say something, and I hope I'm not offending somebody. Our little mountain town is not as open as you might think it is. I have several friends that I have brought up to Lake City, and some of you may know that. And I've had a couple of very bad instances going places with them, where some of our little citizens kind of embarrassed me in the way they acted.
That's sad.
And
That's not the
kind
first
of,
time that's happened. That's happened.
kind of sad.
I've heard that again and again, that there have been
I
situations
bet.
with everything Laurel Justice was doing out with the artist residency out there when she brought some of the women who were artists out there into town. It was challenging. And it doesn't surprise me. It saddens me, but it doesn't surprise me. But it says we have a lot of work to do, as a culture, as a whole. But that's why we as Christians are called to set that pace. We as Christians, and we here in Lake City, we're called to say, no, that's not acceptable.
No, it's not.
Because again, that goes back to the fact that if you look at someone who's Black or Asian or Mexican or Indian or whatever they might be, in somewhere in your brain, if you have any thought of I'm better than you, then we have committed the sin of pride, and we betray the very message of the gospel, which is, this is not our world. Don't prioritize that which we exist in our material existence. Prioritize that which has been in the spiritual. Number 3 on page 134 says diversity gives us a chance to increase our personal resilience. My 2 cents on that is we live in a culture where we've lost across the board any sort of resilience, any sort of grace that allows others to make mistakes, allowed others to try to work through challenges, improvements. And I think this is, and I think that affects both sides of the political spectrum as well. There's a sense of like offense taken and reactionary, and again, that tit for tat, and it's a power struggle. And resilience is part of the long game, not part of the immediate power grab. What else? Nothing else in that section? Well, then we'll come down to our seeking sanctuary, 137. Talking about a culture of violence. Just a few things. We live in a culture of violence. We normalize
Before we go there, the
Yeah.
only
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
that I
go back.
kind of marked was that last paragraph, because he talked
Where?
about the
What page?
prayer. You're 137, but
Okay.
just above it. He'd gone through the prairie with all the insects and the beautiful flowers and all the different ones. And he says, given careful tending, America can be like that restored prairie. And oh gosh, wouldn't that be nice if everybody was truly loved and accepted?
Oh my
And you
gosh.
could make a mistake and not, be judged by it. That's, I guess, what we're working towards, trying.
And I think that's the beauty of having a small 400 person town, is that we do have the capacity to have influence on how this town expresses itself. And I think
Yeah.
that it is, like the rest of the country, has been caught up in the tribalism and othering that has taken place over the last decade of our politics in particular. But we can we can rise above that with the ethic of Christ as being the thing that unifies us. And again, because this isn't our world, and that's why we're called to be peacemakers. We can be
Yeah.
radical peacemakers. We can let go of our anger. We can be nonviolent. We can turn the other cheek, because it doesn't matter what happens in this life. But that's a
But
harsh.
sometimes there too, though, see, you get hung up because, like you were saying, there's there's an anger that's good because sometimes it's not right,
Yeah.
and so you don't know when to say something or when not to say something. Or anyway, that's me. I never say nothing because it's always going to be the wrong time or something, because you don't know how to, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's hard to know when you really have to say something.
Oh yeah, trust me, as a pastor.
Oh, I bet you
No matter
catch
what
that
I
a lot.
say,
That's
I'm gonna make
wrong.
someone mad.
But it's just hard. But it'd be nice to have America like that restored prairie with all the colors and everybody getting along and having respect for each other.
And again, that's a cultural thing. We're not in that culture. We're in a culture that I think we're in the
Kinda
decline
ugly.
of the American culture. I'm not going to say where the height was, because I'm not sure, but I do think
I
that
think
we're in
you're
a place
right.
of where when humans no longer can care for one another in a just a general respectful way, we demonstrate that we've lost civility. And when you get into the place where civility no longer exists, then it becomes survival of the fittest.
On 138, the
Mhm.
first full paragraph, sanctuaries where I find safe space to regain my bearings, reclaim my soul, heal my wounds, and return to the world as a wounded healer.
Yeah.
We've lost a lot of places of sanctuary.
That's why Lake City's so loved, because of the mountains and the streams.
I know.
And it's a sanctuary.
Yeah.
And essentially, that's what church is. The worship is meant to be that, a place
Exactly.
where after we proclaimed the gospel and showed love and didn't get it in return, and were mocked because of it, and were rejected because of it, that we come back into a community of saints that says, no, this is who we are.
Yeah.
You can go back out and do it again. So some people escape cultural violence with escapism. Some people jump into the mosh pit. Some call our culture back to sanity. I'm just trying to highlight some of the things that are being said. Anything? I did think it was interesting at 141 that he notes that when he went on that tour, that the churches were the place where that social activism came out, and then where people found sanctuary. The first full paragraph on 141, by refusing to succumb to the violence of our culture, they transform a struggle that might have become armed warfare into moral witness that altered the lay and the law of the land. That idea of nonviolent struggle has been something that has been a topic of conversation for probably much of human civilization, but definitely through the past few decades, of what it means to have the civil rights movement. What does it mean to live in a violent culture? What does it mean to, in some ways we live in a violent culture. Our kids are exposed to video game violence in ways that detach them, but in other ways they're protected from it because you think about what some of the African countries that where violence and raids and all sorts of or what is going on in Palestine and in Israel, where that violence is the reality that they face every day. It's you want to protect children from that exposure to that because their minds aren't ready to comprehend what
Right.
death actually means in that way. But I think what he's trying to do in this chapter is recognizing that we live in a culture where there's violence happening, both through things like shootings, both through sanctioned violence in our government level, both through but also emotional violence,
Yeah.
political violence. We feel impacted by that and helpless oftentimes to address those things in meaningful and substantive ways.
Jason,
Yeah.
I like bottom of 141 that it kind of describes the sanctuary to where the one I need may not be a building, but silence, the woods, a friendship, a poem, or a song. So we find sanctuary in many things, and I think that's what he was saying there.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think people come to Lake City for that sanctuary. I think that if we I think that everyone loves it. We're the most remote county in the lower 48 states. We're like, yeah, we live in I bet you there are other places that don't have as much public land who probably are considered far more out in the boonies than we are. So it's kind of a false designation anyways. But at the same time, when you're going to, you feel like you're escaping the world.
Well, you kind of have to want to go here. You don't just bypass it.
No, yeah. I mean, there is, and I think that there is, and I think there's a sanity to that.
Yeah, it's not the real world. It's kind of feels safer here.
We live in our own little bubble.
But we all probably have that favorite song that when you hear it, it just brings a state of peace to your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. In all of my research on Taizé, that's what I argued. Really, it's when people go here, they go, maybe there's a picture of the mountains or the picture of their home in the mountains. It brings them back. I think that pilgrims, 100,000 pilgrims go to Taizé every year. It's their place of peace. It's their spiritual home. They have reformed there. They're transformed there. But when they go home to their own countries, their own context, they can flip on some Taizé music and listen to it, and they're brought back to that sense of
Right.
peace. Those are emotional,
Oh,
physiological triggers.
Yeah.
And I think that we need those.
Oh, yeah.
How else do you survive in this insane world?
Yeah, it's grounding.
It's grounding.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to say before we go on 141 at the very
Yeah.
top, I noticed John Lewis's name,
Mhm.
and I think what Parker's talking about, how to use your anger in a productive way. John Lewis talked about good trouble.
Hmm.
Do you remember
No, I
that?
don't,
Yeah.
but I like the concept.
Yeah, he had one of his speeches later in his life. He talked to go out there and get in good trouble.
Yeah.
You get in good trouble.
Yeah,
huh?
like make it productive.
Yeah. Let's think of
That
some
is
good
good.
trouble I can get up to. Like,
Yeah, you already know that.
I bet there's some good trouble I can get up. If I get in trouble in the near future,
Gonna be good
you know
trouble.
who to blame. Okay. It is 6:25. If there's nothing outstanding that anyone wants to lift up or raise, I would say if there's any comments on the Winter's Wood, and then we can end maybe in reading it. That would be. Does that sound like a plan?
Mhm.
Is there anything you want to say anything about it?
I haven't read it yet.
All right. Well, feel free to read along. I will read it, but feel free to read along or just to listen in stillness, and we'll allow this to be our closing liturgy. The winter woods. The winter woods beside a solemn river are twice seen. Once as they pierce the brittle air, once as they dance in the grace beneath the stream. In air these trees stand rough and raw, branch angular in stark design. In water shimmer constantly, disconnect as in a dream, shadowy but more alive than what stands stiff and cold before our eyes. Our eyes at peace are solemn streams, and twice the world itself is seen. Once, as it is outside our heads, hard, frozen now, and winter dead. Once, as it undulates and shines beneath the silent waters of our minds. When rivers churn or cloud with ice, the world is not seen twice. Yet still is there beneath the blinded surface of the stream, livelier and lovelier than we can comprehend, and waiting, always waiting to be seen.
Nice.
Blessings on your weeks. We continue next week with chapter 6, which is staying engaged with your soul. My hope is, I think that, we're getting where we go, and then the chapter 7 is where we go when we die. So as we continue on this path, we have two more. It looks like 2 more chapters, not 8 chapters, and then there's a postlude. But we'll have 2 more weeks in this, and then we'll take our winter break over Christmas. But so staying in, is that all one chapter? Yeah. Keep reaching in is the inward soul stuff, and again, I've read any of this, but my guess is that when you get into the soul, that's where Parker Palmer shines.
Yeah.
And so I'm expecting, if the last 2 chapters have not been great for you, the one on writing and the one on what happened in 2017, essentially, these last 2 chapters will probably bring his sort of, I think that's where he shines as an author.
Redeem him
A little bit. Yeah. So, all right, folks, thanks for joining
Thank
us
you.
today.
All right,
Well, if not before then, we'll see you Sunday.
all right.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.